Welcome to the Northeast Divide podcast. I'm your host, John Lane, and I'm here, as I always am, with Anth, as we normally discuss the two largest football clubs in the Northeast, Newcastle United and Sunderland. We're going to do a show with a bit of a difference. It is the close season, and it is approaching the Euros. You can see me and Anth are in our England gear to talk about former Newcastle and Sunderland players that represented their country. What we've tried to do is we've tried to pick players that broke into the England side or did well for the England side whilst they were playing for our respective clubs. So, there will be lots of players that had played for Newcastle or Sunderland at one point, and then, of course, have played for England. But really, we wanted to kind of keep the focus on the club. And we're also going to maybe talk about the ones that got away as well. So, I'm sure you'll have those players where you think, oh, maybe they should have got a cap or two or 10 or whatever. And we'll talk about those. So, Anth, I'm sure you had an array of players to pick from for this week. Where are we going to start, mate? Who's the first player you want to talk about?
I'm not going to lie, it was a struggle. I mean, it really was a struggle, especially of recent times. Back in the day, also a bit of a struggle, but I got there in the end. I've made a list. Some very, very old school players, some that I didn't even realise had actually played for England. And I mean, we're going back a long, long way to be fair, but it was nice to look back at the history of the club and also someone from more modern day times. I know we discussed, didn't we, players that played for our respective clubs who, we wanted them to play for the club and play for England at the same time, not play. Because I was going to say Chris Waddle. I mean, that would have been clutching at straws because he was towards the end of his career when he came to Sunderland and Roker Park. So, but it was going that way because I was struggling, John. I don't know about. Well, obviously you didn't, did you?
Wow, you say that, but there's not an absolute multitude, I don't think. When I started thinking about it and look, and yeah, we've got two players in the England squad that have gone to the Euros this year, in Kieran Trippier and Anthony Gordon, and they're probably not players I'm going to talk a lot about because Gordon's just broken in. Trippier's been a mainstay, but really he cemented that before he arrived at Newcastle. So I think the hard element for me was right. Well, which players actually had a bit of prominence for England whilst being at Newcastle, and that list actually isn't as long as you'd think when you start to think about it. So I take your point. We should, in theory, given the amount of time we've had in the top flight in the last 30 years, and there should be an array, especially from my age group, I suppose. But when you break it down and boil it down, probably not loads.
Hmm. Well, I got a pretty substantial list, but like I'm saying, I'm going back to 1891 for some of them, and yeah, that's how far I had to go back, John.
And I know you're old, mate, but I don't think you can remember
Yeah.
that far back. So okay, give me your first player then. Who's your first one that you'd pick out in terms of, you know, player that, played for Sunderland, went then played for England, kind of give us your overview.
It's an obvious one. It's an obvious one. I think it's on the tip of all the supporters' tongues, isn't it? It's Super Kev. It's Kevin Phillips. I mean, what a player! What a player! When he came to our club, obviously we hadn't heard much about him. He'd come from obviously Watford for a pittance of a fee. Now, when you think back, I know he's gone on a recent podcast of late and said he possibly would be worth £100 million in this day and age. And you know what? Who am I to argue? He was just fantastic and he deservedly got the call, didn't he? And yeah, I mean, he didn't make many appearances. He made what? How many appearances was that? I'm just having to do my research here. I think it was
For
eight.
who for? Sorry, England 8,
He
yeah.
got 8 caps. He got, didn't he? He got 8 caps between the years of 1999 and 2002. And yeah, I mean, his debut came in a friendly match against Hungary in April 1999. And we had this discussion not on air, off air, didn't we? How he was selected by the one and the only another Super Kev, I suppose, in your part of the world, Kevin Keegan.
Definitely Super Kev, yeah.
Yeah, well, not as good as our Super Kev. Well, arguably, well, we'll not get in that debate anyway.
Yeah,
So
but I
yeah.
think you said it, didn't you? And you're like, actually.
But I mean, fully deserved his caps and possibly deserved more. What he did for Sunderland was outrageous at the time, absolutely outrageous. Like I say, we signed him for a pittance from Watford. I think he'd gone to Watford from Baldock Town initially for another pittance, and he was absolutely fantastic for us in the Championship and also in the top flight in the Premier League. Some of the goals he scored were outstanding, and he fully deserved his call ups. He didn't get any goals. He didn't really get a chance to shine as such. But I think there was obviously a glut of outstanding strikers back then also, and I think he maybe's deserved more caps. But all credit to Keegan for giving him a chance, because you know, was it the Championship when I'm going to mention another name a bit later. He's not one of my most
Yeah.
favorite players, but he was a good player. But yeah, I'll get into that a little bit later. But it was all credit to Kevin Keegan for looking down the league as such and in a different league, the Championship, because that doesn't happen in this day and age, does it?
No, and I was just about to go into that. So that was the thing I remember most about when Kevin Phillips was selected, was the fact that Sunderland were in the Championship, they were flying in the Championship, and they won. Well, sorry, Division 1. They were
Yeah.
flying in Division 1, and I think they won the league that year. And obviously, Kevin Phillips was a big part of that. And you're absolutely right. We just wouldn't see that in this day and age. Now, you've got to remember, like less than 4 years earlier than that, England had strikers like, Andy Cole, Chris Sutton, what's he called? Collymore, like not getting selected for England. So to think 3 years later, Keegan's looking down the leagues to see if he can find a striker. And it's probably because the Premier League was starting to go into that international market a little bit more, what have you. But the following year, it's quite interesting actually. I've just seen something that made us laugh. So in the run up to the start of the night, this is Wikipedia for you, everyone. So in the run up to the start of 99-2000 FA Premier League season, pundit Rodney Marsh predicted that Phillips would struggle to get more than 5 or 6 goals at the higher level. And that was the year that he got 30 and won the Golden Boot. So, it just shows you how much pundits know about these things. But yeah, I think, yeah, Kevin Phillips absolutely deserved his call up, and fair play to Kevin Keegan for calling him up. He made 8 appearances between 1999 and 2002 for England and didn't manage to get a goal. But and he did get into the squad for Euro 2000, but he didn't play at all in that tournament. And who knows what might happen? But when you got Shearer and Owen ahead of you, it's going to be difficult. Now I might talk about one of those players later, everybody, but I'm sure you can guess which one I'm going to talk about. But we'll get onto that later. The next one I want to talk about is probably another surprise inclusion, and that's a certain Andrew Thomas Carroll. So Andy Carroll, who was basically, came through the academy at Newcastle, got himself into the first team, kind of became more prominent in the first team the year that we got relegated. Shearer started to play him towards the end of that season when, it was inevitable that we were going to go down, get relegated. Carroll then has a really good year in the Championship to help us get promoted. And then he's given the number 9 shirt at the start of the 2010-11 season. And I believe it was Fabio Capello that called him up into the England squad. Now, this, for me, I think the reason, I think Carroll playing for England, I think really improved his game. I noticed a massive difference when he came back from international duty and came back into the Newcastle side. You could see that he'd had some decent coaching when he'd been away, and his level had definitely lifted up a little bit. Little did I know that a few months later he'd be going to Liverpool for £35 million. But look, I think I will stand by that. Actually, that's probably one of the best deals that has ever been done at our club from a financial point of view. I think romantically, it was a horrible thing to happen as a fan at the time. It felt awful. It felt like kind of all hope was gone. But he deserved his place in the England squad, and he was given a chance. And he went on in terms of his England career, and he ended up playing. He only played 9 games for England over a couple of years, and he scored 2 goals. But I felt that when he played for England, he did what he was there to do. He was a handful. He bullied defenders, made it difficult for them, and he was capable of a goal, but probably just not prolific enough. And actually, I talk about that 35 million. That just shows that Newcastle sold him at the right time for the right price. The only difference is that if we were to do that now, you'd be confident that we'd be reinvesting that 35 million back into the squad. It was a very different club 14 years ago. That's for sure.
I remember that transfer. It was like silly season, wasn't it? With like exuberant transfer fees and what have you. And I mean, he was a local lad, done good for years, wasn't he? And to be fair, before he got transferred to Liverpool, he played really well, didn't he? He played really well. He was a big, strong lad. I mean, is he still playing? I think he's still. Is he
Yeah,
still playing in
he's
some capacity?
playing.
He is.
Yeah, so he's playing for a French side. Anth, listen to this pronunciation. So
Oh,
Amiens.
Amiens.
Yeah, Amiens.
Will,
Hey, there
will
we
your dad
go.
approve of that? Will your dad approve of that?
Yes,
Yeah.
he will. And he wears, what number shirt do you think he wears at Amiens?
Oh, my word, it's got to be some random number if it's French football, is it?
Right, so I'll give you it in French. So it's
Come on then. Oh, don't.
99. So he
99.
wears number 99. Number
What on earth?
99. Yes. But this is this thing, isn't it? Where if the number
Yeah.
9's taken, a player will wear 99 or something like this. This happens more and more.
That's utterly bizarre.
Yeah. But that's this is where we are. So yeah, so he's playing for Amiens. But his career. So obviously he was at Newcastle until 2011. He had a loan spell at Preston in 2007 and 8. He then obviously went to Liverpool. He then went on loan to West Ham and then signed for them. Was at West Ham for 6 years and then came back to Newcastle in 2019 under the Ashley regime to play for the mighty Steve Bruce. And then he left Newcastle after that 2-year period and played for Reading, and then West Brom, and then Reading again, and then Amiens. So, but I think he's done all right. I think Amiens in the second tier as well. So it's a slightly less of a level that maybe he's played at before, but and I think ultimately he's had an injury ravaged career. I think that's probably what's caused in terms of his career. But what is really interesting is he scored more goals for Newcastle than any other club. Now, considering he left, he'd only really been playing first team football for 2.5 years when he left Newcastle, and then obviously he had that 2-year spell he had in 2019. He only scored 1 goal, so he scored 32 goals for Newcastle. But yeah, every other club he played for, even West Ham, where he had 102 appearances, he only scored 26 goals. So we got the best of him in terms of his goal scoring. I don't think Liverpool was ever the right fit for him. He only ended up at Liverpool because they sold Torres to Chelsea for 50 million. They wanted someone in on top of Luis Suarez. And yeah, it wasn't the right fit. It was a very much a rushed signing, and the nature of the fact that the story goes that Liverpool offered 25 million, we knocked it back. They offered 30, they knocked it back, and they were joking in the boardroom they'll come back with another offer here, and the offer of 35 million came in, and they're like, yeah, we have to accept it. So that's the story. So that's my first England player for Newcastle. I'm going to hand back over for number 2, Anth.
Number 2, is that quite apt when it comes to this particular player? Not on the pitch. Not on the pitch, just certain revelations or rumours abound off the pitch. He was a loyal servant, a good player, and yeah, I mean, he started his career at Manchester United. Didn't get much of a look in there. He was young when he was there, though. I don't know if Giggsy was there because I think he formerly played as a winger, but then he played for left back for us. He was more like getting forward, crossing the ball, etc. He was pretty much exceptional. And I'm going to go for Mickey Gray. Mickey Gray got his cap 19. Well, got 3 caps. 1999. So yeah, to be fair, again, he'd earned his place. I think he was outstanding. He was in great form, and just a few misdemeanors off the pitch apparently, which I'm not going to talk about for legal reasons in case I get hauled across the coals. But yeah, his reputation. His reputation preceded him a little bit in Sunderland, and I witnessed him out and about on certain nights out, giving it the big I am, which didn't go down well with the locals when he was in local bars and clubs. So yeah, and there was a story about when at Roker Park. A lot of staff got made redundant, and I don't know if this is fact or fiction, but I'm assuming it's pretty much fact. Nailed on. He turned up in a Ferrari, when everyone had just lost the job. So yeah, but anyway, as a player, I'm going a little bit off kilter here. As a player, I couldn't fault him for Sunderland. He gave his all. He was skillful. He was quick. He had great hair, to be fair. We'll not talk about his hair in this day and age because he's had some sort of weird weave. But anyway, he'd earned his caps, and again, it was Keegan who called him up for those 3 caps. And I'm not quite sure. I always need to do a bit more research. I don't know if him and Phillips were actually in the same team at one stage playing for England. I don't know if they got like minutes on the pitch together.
Well, I think we were just looking at that because was it not? It was Hungary for Gray's debut. I think it was the same game when game when Phillips made his debut. So I don't know if they're on the pitch at the same time, but I think they certainly played in the same game. But yeah, he only played 3 games. Again, being plucked from Division 1 rather than Premier League, and look, and Keegan, I think, gets a lot of criticism for his time as England manager because, I think the thoughts were. I mean, I don't think it wasn't a job for Keegan really. Keegan's a little bit in the Eddie Howe mold in terms of he wants that interaction with the players on a day-to-day basis. Like he's a Monday to Friday manager, and that's not the England job, is it? It's a very different kind of role. So Keegan used to find himself like at the training ground doing training the deaf footballers and stuff and all that kind of thing, because he just wanted to get involved and coach and be part of it, but he didn't enjoy the England job at all. And I think ultimately that's why he struggled, because he just didn't have enough kind of to do. But the fact that he was big enough and brave enough to kind of, to go down the divisions and pick those. And I don't think it was done in a Mike Bassett kind of, Benson Hedges style. It was very much he believed in the players he was bringing in and thought that they could add something that he didn't have. And you can't imagine like Southgate doing that and getting away with it either. I don't think that kind of forgiveness wouldn't be there in the same way, would it? It would be very much a matter of, well, no, that's like, you can't do that. How can you even think about looking at the second tier? That's how it would be viewed. But there is some talent there. And if you look at the England squad now, there's lots of players that have played at those lower levels that have then worked their way through the system. I think it's something ridiculous, like 2/3 of the England 26 have played for a football league club at some point. So look, that says to me that the pyramid is a really healthy part of football. But it was refreshing really to have a time when England manager wasn't afraid to say, if you're playing well, it doesn't matter what division you're in, you'd be considered.
Do you know a prime example of that? Back in the day, Steve Bull. I mean, what a player for Wolverhampton Wanderers. And I mean, he, again, another player who fully deserved his call up and gave his all. So, yeah, like you say, some of these players who are now coming up and coming to fruition and have signed for clubs in the Premiership have played down the football pyramid, and they've earned it, basically. And I think it's a good education. It really is. I think it teaches them respect as well. It does. And I mean, when you look at the modern day professional, the ones who play for England, they seem they're really happy to play for England. They're really proud. They conduct themselves well. They interview well. I mean, obviously, whatever kind of media training they get, it obviously works, and you can see it. You can see it means a lot to them. Whereas, I mean, some players, England players back in the day, maybe he's not so much, and so obviously off the field antics and that. But yeah, so all credit to these players who've come up through the footballing pyramid and are now there or thereabouts for England.
Definitely. So the next player I'm going to talk about is he was a midfielder for Newcastle, central midfielder. We managed to sign him because we convinced him that Newcastle was closer to London than Middlesbrough. True story.
I know you're talking about.
Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about straight away. He was signed in 1992 by Kevin Keegan, who's very prominent on this podcast this evening, given the subject matter and just given some of the links. And it's a guy called Rob Lee. So Rob Lee played for 10 years for Newcastle, 303 appearances, 44 goals. Probably one of our strongest players in the 95-96 season when we should have won the title. But he went on and he's very prominent. I think one of my favourite Rob Lee moments at St James's Park was that diagonal ball against Aston Villa to Alan Shearer, who then side foot volley at the Gallagher end past Peter Schmeichel. Hell of a goal. But it was all about the pass for me. Sorry, Al, if you're listening. But no, it was it really was a great goal. But it really interesting in terms of his international career. So he was called up for the first time against a friendly against the United States in September '94 by, I'm assuming, Terry Venables at that point. And he scored on his debut. He scored on his debut the following month against Romania. I don't know how that works. How do you make your debut against anyway? So so I think, yeah, so I'm assuming that he might have been called up for the squad, but actually didn't play until he played against Romania and he scored in that goal, in that game, sorry. I think the biggest surprise, it's interesting, like Wikipedia have called this out. He's surprisingly omitted from the England squad for Euro 96 under Venables, despite arguably being better form in 96 than he was when Hoddle called him up for the World Cup in 1998. So he played France 98, but he didn't get a look in for the squad for Euro 96. And it's an interesting one, isn't it? But then you look at the midfielders that went to Euro 96, Gaza, David Platt, Paul Ince, Jamie Redknapp was in that squad as well. You know, if you're looking at the central midfielders, so really, like, can you understand Rob Lee not getting into that squad? Or actually, given the fact that, you know, he almost took Newcastle a Premier League title in the middle of that park, was he a bit hard done by?
I think he was pretty much hard done by. He was. Do you know what? He's one of those players. Dare I say it? I'm sorry, Sunderland supporters. He was one of those players who even a Sunderland supporter could appreciate. For he had silky skills, didn't he? He went about his business with the minimum of fuss. I mean, he could, like you say, the ball for Shearer's goal, which fluke. The ball
Absolutely
for
not.
Shearer's the ball for Shearer's goal. I mean, it was exquisite, and he could thread a ball through the eye of a needle, as the saying goes. So yeah, he was a great player for years, and a player that if I was a neutral, I would be like, yeah, I really like him, and I respect what he did for Newcastle, the amount of performances he put in, and you know he was a great player, and he seems like a nice bloke as well. Seems like a nice bloke when you watch him in this day and age when he's being interviewed about his Newcastle sort of career, or you know, about other footballing issues. He interviews well and he comes across as a nice bloke. So yeah, good player, good player.
Yeah, always like Rob Lee. Always had time for him and felt it was a shame when he left the club. It's still like, although it was right for him to leave the club at that time, it still felt like it was a shame that he went. But I think, you know, it gets to a point, isn't it, where, you know, your squad's moving on and sometimes, you know, it's right for players to go. But he got a testimony. He had his testimony against Athletic Bilbao in a pre-season. I think there was only about 20,000 that went, and that was after the extension was there. But you know, I will hasten to say, I think it was 30 quid a ticket, and at the time that was quite a lot for a pre-season testimonial friendly. Essentially, I think, and it was really like a pre-season friendly with the word testimonial above it, rather than kind of, you know, like a Shearer's where, you know, it's at the end of the season against Celtic, and then, you know, all these players have come back to play in it. There was no like, you know, there was no one kind of coming back from the last 10 years to come and play. It was very much just the squad that was there. So I think that's part of the reason why. But look, yeah, fantastic player for us. Went on to play for Derby after, obviously, we'd signed him from Charlton, and he scored for Newcastle against Charlton in the FA Cup as well. And I think he was captain that day because he was going back, and that was the other thing with Rob Lee. He was a leadership figure. He became captain, and then he went through all that shit under Ruud Gullit, who took his squad number off him, stripped him of the captaincy, gave the captaincy to Shearer at that stage, and then his autobiography was Come In number 37, which was a nod to the number that Robson gave him, and then of course he scored that goal in the FA Cup semi-final in 2000, one of the last semi-finals played at the old Wembley. And at that point, we scored that equaliser, and I was convinced we were going to win the FA Cup that year. And Chelsea ended up winning the game 2-1, and it felt like that was the lost opportunity because would have played Villa in the final, who weren't great at that stage. So yeah, it's funny how these sliding doors moments happen. But yeah, Rob Lee, such a special player for us. You must have another player lined up for us, Anth.
Now I've got one, but he's not the most obvious one. I was just the fact that he he only gained one single cap and he only played for 45 minutes, I think, in total. I just thought he deserved a special mention because I really liked him as a player. He flew under the radar a little bit, and when he came, I mean, it was without a great fanfare, to be perfectly honest with you. It was Gavin McCann, and again, I look like I'm going in year by year here, but 2001. 2001, a single cap in a friendly against Spain at Villa Park. 45 minutes, I think he played. Now he was I think he was not much maligned, but undervalued as a player. I think when he came, maybe people saw him as a squad player to Sunderland, but he played fantastic for us. Played absolutely fantastic for us. Gave his all, and yeah, 100%. He had a bit about him as well, not just all blood and thunder with the tackles and stuff. I mean, he had a good shot on him. He was good in the tackle. Obviously, he could ping a ball about as well. So yeah, he's one that doesn't get mentioned very much. So I thought I'd give him a special mention. There were some others on the list who more sort of household names, but I think Gavin deserves a special mention.
Yeah, I'm just looking into this now. Yeah, he's pretty much played his entire career in the top flight as well.
Hmm. Yep,
Which which
tells you a
which
story, doesn't it?
actually,
Tells you
yeah.
a story.
So there's only a few players that have done that, but he had a 15-year career. So he started in 1995. He was at Everton. He
Yep.
only played 11 times in that 3-year period. Obviously, he's trying to break in to the first team. That's when he went to Sunderland. That's where he made the most appearances, 116 appearances, 8 goals for you. And then he went to Villa. He was there for 4 years, 110 appearances, 3 goals, and then finished his career at Bolton under just after Allardyce had gone. Actually, I think. Oh, did you go down? No, they might. Oh, so he might have gone down to the Championship then potentially, because I think they got relegated in 2008. But yeah, 75 appearances, 1 goal, but most of his career in that top flight. And that's that's incredibly impressive. Let's have a look. Oh no, they did. No, I apologize. They were still in the Premier League. So
Mhm.
2007, 8, they survived with a 16th place finish. So they did stay up, but they'd played in Europe in that time. Yeah, so it was 2012 when they got relegated. So look, I think that in itself, 15-year top flight exclusive career, and then he's managed to get his England cap amongst that. And yeah, he didn't kind of get another call up, but I think that's credit to him and what he did. My last player is a little bit more prominent, a little bit more obvious. I may have mentioned him already in the podcast, but he's the reason why I kind of fell in love with football, and I'll tell the story. So I'm 10 years old. It's Euro '96. Everywhere everywhere you go, you hear Three Lions playing in the background, and basically I was watching the England games, and there was this guy playing up front for England, scoring all these goals, called Alan Shearer. Geordie, but was playing for Blackburn, of course, at the time. Now, of course, I kind of followed football a bit, and Newcastle had almost won the league the previous year. And obviously after that summer, after we narrowly lost on penalties to Germany, I think if we go through that tournament's ours to win. I then go on holiday with a family, not really thinking much of it, just enjoying a few weeks away. And we find out through a newspaper article my dad had read about the Charity Shield that Alan Shearer signed for Newcastle. And I was like, what? like
I bet you were.
it was beyond my wildest dreams, Anth. Like this striker who'd absolutely starred for England in the summer, then signs for Newcastle for a world record fee. I felt like it was a dream, and I think that's the best way I can describe it. And I think football, when you're a certain age, certain things can happen in football which make you feel that way. And it's one of those genuine moments where I felt like I was dreaming and I couldn't believe it was true. When we got home, I remember buying the Black and White magazine. It was a double issue Shearer special. Read it cover to cover a couple of times, just to kind of have this sink in. And then Hoddle then made Alan Shearer England captain when he came in as manager. So Shearer captained the side for the first time against Moldova, where won 3-0 in a World Cup qualifier. And Shearer was a prominent part of that side that then qualified for France 98 and of course got knocked out in the second round of the World Cup after Beckham and his misdemeanor. But Sol Campbell had a golden goal which looked perfectly fine, ruled out. So again, England, pretty unlucky. And then Shearer stuck around, and he decided, whilst at Euro 2000, that was going to be his last tournament, and that he was going to retire from international football. Now, I remember talking to my dad about that at the time, and my dad being pretty upset about it, feeling like Shearer had kind of let the side down in a way, and that he had more in the tank and what have you. But it's the best thing he ever did for Newcastle, because that's really the career he then went on to have at Newcastle in that last 6 years after he'd retired. Certainly 4 of those last 6 years, he was still an incredibly important player for us. Obviously broke the goal scoring record for Newcastle as well. He also, Anth, is the last England player to lift a trophy. And it's a trophy called Le Tournoi, which was a pre-season tournament, which was very famous for a particular goal. And I don't know, any ideas what I'm talking about here?
Le Tournoi. Le Tournoi?
Le Tournoi. Hey,
Le
I tell you
Tournoi.
what, elocution lessons here. So there were 4 teams in that tournament. Okay, so there was England, Italy, France, and Brazil.
Oofed.
And basically, this was just it's kind of, this idea is you have this friendly tournament. It's like a practice tournament before you host the World Cup the following year. So that's where it came from. Roberto Carlos scored a free kick in that tournament. Now you know what I'm talking about.
Now I know.
Which was pretty special. In a 1-1 draw with France, he scores a free kick from about 35-40 yards outside the left foot, bends right out and comes back in. But yeah, that was the same tournament Alan Shearer lifted the tournament trophy, because we beat Italy and we beat France and we lost to Brazil in the last game. But that is, you'll notice that on the thumbnail, everyone, when you see that. The other thing just to mention as well is there's a certain player who played for both Newcastle and Sunderland who was in that squad but didn't play, never got an England cap. Do you know who it is, Anth?
Whoa, now you're really testing us. I feel like I'm in a pub quiz here, and this is the sports football section. Wow. Come on then, Stato. Let's have it. I haven't got a clue. Come on.
Lee Clark.
Wow, Clarky, aye, right.
Yeah, so
Okay.
Lee Clark was called up to
Wow.
that squad, and obviously he was
Wow.
a Sunderland player at the time. I think he'd
Did not know
just
that.
got promoted, or no, he just left Newcastle to go to
Wow.
Sunderland that summer, and he was picked in the England squad, but he didn't play. So he's one of the very few. I'm fairly sure he's the only England player to have a winner's medal of some description, but never play a game for England.
Tell you what, that's a hell of a stat, that, isn't it?
There you go. I'm gonna have people commenting underneath saying, "No, there's this player as well."
Do you know what you're talking about, Shearer as well? I mean, he was a player, like, wasn't he? Obviously, I just remember the massive news coverage and exposure with regards to when he did sign for us. And I think it was Alan Robson, the Flashing Blade. I don't know if anyone else will know that unless they're from the northeast of England. Presented him on stage outside of St James Park, and I just remember the crowds. I mean, it was pretty phenomenal. It was a hell of a turnout for him, and I'm sure it was one working day during the week. And I'm thinking there's a lot of people not going into work today, or they're using some excuse
or
not
school.
to go in. But or school. Sorry, yeah. So yeah, it was a massive turnout, and I I was going to say I always remember Euro 96, but I don't because I worked in Ibiza at the time as a holiday rep. So I didn't watch any of it. I didn't watch any of it. Although I remember going to certain bars with some of our holiday makers and they had it on there. And I remember the celebrations when we did win, but then when we got knocked out, we weren't allowed to go down to a certain part of Ibiza because it was a bit leery and lively. But I watched the games eventually a few years later, and the one that sticks in my mind is the win against Holland,
Yeah.
which was just for, I mean, obviously Shearer on the score sheet, phenomenal. So yeah, I mean, he 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 brought his league game and his Newcastle form to the international stage, didn't he? And for that, you can't fault him. And yeah, Alan Shearer, there you go.
You know what it is? It's funny. I remember when Shearer was going to retire, and I remember feeling like it was the right time for him to go at the time. And boy, have I ever felt differently the following couple of years, because you don't know what you've got till it's gone sometimes.
Mm.
And I mean, I remember, like, me and my dad were talking about this a few months ago about how you get a free kick, an indirect free kick in the box, and you like it to go. Get a penalty to go. You get a, and there was certain things that used to happen, and you just knew it was just, oh, it's all right, it's a goal. The jeopardy was almost completely gone because he was that good. I tell you, the other thing that he's not best known for, but he always used to be at the front post for corners. And I tell you what, the amount of times he'd boot the ball, it would come in, it would be, it wouldn't be a great delivery, but he'd be there and he'd be booting it out away, up the field and on top of it. But I think you see kind of his media career and kind of the way he conducts himself. I think he's obviously well liked in that area, and he gets the bants right, and obviously he gives you lots of sticks, so that's always going to put him well with us. But no, and of course he scored his last goal at the Stadium of Light, as we've said before. But the reason that was his last goal was his last game as well, because there was I can't remember if he was tackled or whether it was an innocuous one. And then that was a knee injury, and he'd already said he was going to retire at the end of that season. But yeah, obviously a hugely important player for Newcastle and England. And only went to he went to 3 major tournaments, didn't win, 4 major tournaments. Sorry, he went to Euro 92 as well, of course, but only 1 World Cup. But he won the Golden Boot, of course, Euro 96. And that, again, that was what brought me to football, really. That's what got me on the journey. And then when he signed for Newcastle, that was it. It was just crazy, out of world experience, it felt at the time. All right. So my last question, Anth, on this one is there a player that played for Sunderland who was English who you feel should have had a call up and you feel was one that got away from England?
Jimmy Montgomery. I mean, what a keeper. Obviously, the 1973 Cup final always springs to mind. That miraculous double save. Outstanding. Just so much natural talent. Such a good goalkeeper. A lovely gentleman as well. Again, he's gone down in Sunderland folklore, not just for the things he did on the pitch, but also off the pitch. Again, the way he conducts himself off the pitch. He's been a loyal servant, and yeah, I think at the time there maybe was a glut of very, very talented keepers with regards to on the international stage for England, and he was just very unfortunate because he was just special. He was just so good, and that's the main one for me. I'm sure there's supporters out there that may agree or not agree with us, but yeah, it's sad because I think his performances around that time deserved it.
That's a good shout. I'm going to go for a goalkeeper as well for Newcastle. And I'm going to talk about Steve Harper. Now, it's an interesting one with Steve Harper because obviously he didn't play regularly for Newcastle, really, until Shea Given left. Shea Given was very prominently the number one from 97 all the way through to when he left in the January of 2009. Yeah. Now, I believe really strongly if Steve Harper had left Newcastle and gone and got first team football somewhere, I think he would have played for England, because the other thing to mention on this front is David Seaman was coming towards the end of his career. David James, you know, he had a nickname of Calamity James, for fuck's sake. Do you know what I mean? Like the guy was not a reliable, dependable keeper. We had a bit of a crisis of goalkeepers pretty much until I think Joe Hart came in around about 2010 or so. So there's a period of time there where if Harps had been playing regular first team football, I think he would have got a call up and I think he would have kept his place. I don't think there was ever a lot between him and Shay Given. I think Shay Given was a better keeper and I think he deserved to play. But I always kind of felt in a PSR world, Given would have been a player that you would have sold and taken a big profit on, and you would have played Steve Harper, and you wouldn't have. I don't think you would have noticed as big a difference. And fans can agree or disagree with me on that, but that was always kind of how I felt about it. And there was a couple of times when Allardyce came in and Harper got the start at the start of Allardyce managing the club, and it was only he played Given in the League Cup at Arsenal, and Given played out his skin and won the shirt back, and that was it. He played through until pretty much until he left the club. But Harper's one, and obviously he towards the very end of his career, he was at Sunderland. He didn't play any games, but I think he was pretty much more there from the backroom staff point of view. But now he's a prominent part. He's now academy director at Newcastle. It's obviously a big part of kind of what we're doing in terms of trying to develop the youth setup and everything else. But I always felt he was one that England could have called and didn't in terms of a Newcastle player. But we have been talking about England. Obviously, we're looking forward to the first game for the Euros, which Germany are playing Scotland on Friday night. So that'll be a nice start. Nice to watch the Germans in the tournament and maybe not be too despondent if they win in that first game. But then England, of course, start their journey against Serbia on Sunday evening. But Anth, thank you very much for joining us. I've really enjoyed that chat. It's been great. Next week, we've got a great show for you. We're going to do a bit of a season update, and we're going to have a special guest with us to talk us through how the close season's going and where it could go from there. I've been John. He's been Anth. This has been the Northeast Divide podcast. Thank you and goodbye.